One evening after dinner, I felt a wave of heat, and sweat soaked my back. I decided to take a shower to feel more comfortable. The bathroom was tiny, and the warm water on my skin felt soothing. After the shower, I changed into a soft beige dress with a V-neck line and a long zipper at the back, something I usually wore at home. When I stepped into the bedroom to put it on, I realized the zipper got stuck halfway up. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pull it up. Feeling slightly flustered, I considered calling my husband for help. As I stepped into the living room, the dim light revealed only one person, my father-in-law, Mr. Charles, sitting in his chair with a book. Hearing my steps, he looked up, his expression surprised. "Where's James?" I asked, my voice slightly uneasy. "James just stepped out, probably to run some errands." "Is everything all right?" His tone was calm, reassuring. Biting my lip, I realized there was no other option. "The zipper on my dress is stuck. Could you help me with it?" I asked awkwardly. He set his mug on the table, stood up, and approached me. "Let me see," he said. Standing right behind me, the space between us felt uncomfortably close. His breath softly brushed against the back of my neck, sending a wave of discomfort through me. He gently examined the zipper, frowning slightly. "Looks like the fabric is caught," he remarked before giving it a careful tug. A faint click broke the silence, and everything happened too quickly. The zipper slid down entirely, and the silky dress fell to my feet in an instant. For a moment, I stood there frozen, overwhelmed by an odd sense of timelessness. A cool draft from the window brushed against my skin. "Hi everyone, my name is Mia, and I'm 31 years old. I've been married to James for 3 years. On the surface, our family life seems perfect. We have a beautiful home, stable jobs, and financial security. James is a wonderful husband, loyal and loving. As for me, I take pride in my growing career, which allows me to express my skills and find joy in my daily work. We live with my father-in-law, Mr. Charles, who is in his early 60s. He's a strong and composed man, someone I've always admired. He's not just a father figure in our family, he often acts as a mediator during disagreements between James and me. Most of our disputes center around children. James wants to expand our family and fill our home with laughter, but I'm not ready yet. I want to focus on my career and achieve my goals before stepping into motherhood. This difference in perspective has sparked countless arguments, but our love for each other has never wavered. James is always patient, and I try to explain my feelings after every disagreement. Mr. Charles intervenes kindly, reminding us that family is about understanding and that every issue can be resolved over time. Thanks to his advice, James and I have learned to listen to and compromise with one another. I thought our lives would continue smoothly, but one evening, everything changed. That day started just like any other. The day began as usual, filled with the mundane rhythm of life. I woke up earlier than usual to prepare breakfast for the family. James preferred a simple start to his day, a slice of toast with a cup of black coffee. I treated myself to a warm glass of milk, hoping it would energize me for the long hours ahead. Mr. Charles sat at the dining table, sipping his tea while flipping through the morning newspaper, his daily ritual. The house carried a serene, homely warmth, filled with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and buttered toast. After breakfast, I got ready for work. My job wasn't overly demanding, but it required a high level of focus. I dressed in a crisp white blouse, tailored trousers, and a pair of modest heels, a look that always gave me confidence. On my way to the office, I stopped by the neighborhood coffee shop for a latte, a small indulgence before tackling the day. Work that day was busier than usual. Back-to-back meetings left little time for a breather. Emails, reports, and assignments stacked up, but I approached each task with optimism, knowing my work was more than just a responsibility, it was my passion. By the time the clock struck 5 p.m., I felt both accomplished and drained. As I stepped out of the office, the golden rays of the setting sun painted the streets in a warm glow, offering a sense of relief after a long day. I stopped by a nearby grocery store to pick up fresh ingredients. Tonight, I planned a special dinner, a chance to bring the family together after what felt like weeks of hurried meals and rushed conversations. When I got home, I headed straight to the kitchen. James arrived shortly after and greeted me with a warm smile, helping me set the table. Dinner was an elaborate spread: steaming chicken soup, crispy pan-fried fish, and tender roasted vegetables. Mr. Charles emerged from his study, his face lighting up at the sight of the meal. We gathered around the table, enjoying each other's company. Conversations flowed, laughter punctuated the meal, and even the usual light debates about children felt less contentious. Family dinners like this were my sanctuary, a reminder of what really mattered. But after dinner, the tranquility unraveled. Feeling overheated, I decided to take a shower to refresh myself. The cold water seemed to wash away the day's stress, leaving me calm. Afterward, I slipped into my favorite cream-colored silk dress with a zipper at the back. Standing in front of the mirror, I struggled with the zipper, which stubbornly refused to move past the halfway point. I stepped out into the living room to find James, intending to ask for his help, but the room was empty. "James?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly. There was no response. Instead, it was Mr. Charles who looked up from his chair, his book resting in his lap. "James isn't here," he said. "He stepped out for a while." "What's wrong?" Hesitating for a moment, I finally admitted, "The zipper on my dress is stuck. Could you help me?" He nodded, putting his book aside, and stood up. His expression was calm, as usual, as he approached me. Standing behind me, he gently examined the zipper. "It's caught in the fabric," he murmured, his voice close enough that I could feel his breath on the nape of my neck. With a careful tug, he attempted to free the zipper, but instead, it slid downward with a sudden jerk. The silky dress slipped off, pooling at my feet. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. I froze, rooted to the spot, my thoughts scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. A cool breeze drifted through the room, sending a shiver down my spine. His voice broke the silence, filled with regret.
"I'm so sorry, Mia."
I didn't mean for that to happen. Quickly, I pulled the dress back up, my hands trembling. "It's fine, Mr. Charles. It's just the zipper," I stammered, unable to meet his eyes. He stepped back, his movements deliberate, as if trying to maintain composure. "Fix it yourself and ask James for help when he returns," he said, his voice measured. Without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving me alone. The air felt thick and oppressive as I stood there, my heart pounding wildly. Embarrassment and confusion swirled within me, making it impossible to focus on anything else. That night, when James returned home, cheerful and oblivious, I struggled to act normal. But inside, I felt completely undone. The days following the incident were tense and unsettling. Mr. Charles had always been approachable, his demeanor warm and composed, but now everything felt different. He avoided speaking to me directly, his usual calmness replaced by an awkward distance. When our paths crossed in the house, his eyes barely met mine, and an uncomfortable silence hung between us. I noticed, however, fleeting moments when his gaze lingered. He seemed lost in thought, his expression unreadable. Each time, I quickly looked away, pretending not to notice, but my heart raced, and my mind churned with unease. I convinced myself that this was temporary, that things would return to normal with time, but I was wrong. One morning, I woke up feeling under the weather. My throat was sore, my head heavy, and a quick temperature check revealed a mild fever. James had left for work early, and I decided to take the day off to rest. Mr. Charles was home, as usual, spending time in his study. I stayed in bed most of the morning, but the stuffiness of the room eventually became unbearable, prompting me to move to the living room for some fresh air. I was dressed modestly in simple pajamas, my hair loose, and my face pale from illness. When I entered the living room, I saw Mr. Charles sitting in his chair, his eyes fixed on his phone. I murmured a quiet good morning, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked up slowly, his eyes scanning me with an intensity that made me uneasy. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, his voice louder than usual, breaking the silence. "Not really. I have a mild fever, so I decided to stay home," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. He nodded but said nothing more, his gaze lingering on me longer than I was comfortable with. I felt a tension in the air, a shift in the usual dynamic that left me uneasy. I turned toward the door, intending to step outside for some fresh air, but his voice stopped me mid-step. "Mia, wait," he called, his tone firm. "I need to talk to you about something." I froze, my heart tightening as an inexplicable sense of dread washed over me. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. He stood, his movements deliberate, and closed the distance between us with measured steps. "You're beautiful," he said softly, his voice low but distinct. The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, suffocating and unrelenting. I stiffened, my breath caught in my throat. "Mr. Charles," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "What are you saying? This is inappropriate." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took another step closer, his expression conflicted but resolute. "Mia, I don't know what's happening to me," he admitted, his voice faltering. "Since that day, I can't stop thinking about you." The room seemed to close in on me, the air growing thick and oppressive. "This isn't right," I said, my voice trembling. "You're my father-in-law. This will destroy everything." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with anguish. "I know it's wrong, but I can't control these feelings. I've tried, but they won't go away." I took a step back, desperate to create some distance. "Please, stop this," I pleaded, my eyes welling with tears. "This family means everything to me. Don't ruin it." He paused, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his emotions was too much to bear. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice broken. "I don't want to hurt you or James, but I can't pretend anymore." I turned to leave, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere. As I reached the door, he spoke again, his tone filled with regret. "Mia, please forgive me. I'm so sorry." I didn't look back. Tears streamed down my face as I fled to the sanctuary of my room, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. That night, I lay awake, haunted by his words and the undeniable fact that nothing would ever be the same. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of unease. The tension in the house was palpable, and though I tried to act normal, the weight of what had happened pressed down on me constantly. I avoided Mr. Charles as much as possible, keeping to my room when James was at work and leaving only when necessary. But even with this effort, moments of encounter were inevitable. Each time we crossed paths, I felt his gaze linger, filled with unspoken words that I was too afraid to acknowledge. My own emotions churned between anger, guilt, and confusion. How could someone I respected so deeply, someone I trusted, let things spiral like this? And yet, a part of me felt equally complicit, haunted by the question of whether I had somehow encouraged this, even unintentionally. One evening, as James and I sat down for dinner, he noticed my distraction. "Mia, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. I forced a smile, nodding quickly. "Just a little tired from work," I replied, hoping he wouldn't press further. But James wasn't convinced. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "You've been distant lately. If something's bothering you, you can tell me." For a moment, I considered telling him everything. The words hovered on the edge of my tongue, but the thought of the devastation it would cause held me back. How could I destroy the bond between James and his father? How could I risk shattering this family? Instead, I squeezed his hand reassuringly.
I promis ai fine.
"Just a lot on my mind with work," I said softly. He seemed to accept my answer, though a shadow of doubt lingered in his eyes. That night, As James slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, my thoughts racing. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The strain was taking a toll on me, and it was only a matter of time before it became too much to bear. I needed to find a way out, a way to protect this family from falling apart. The next morning, I made a decision. After James left for work, I approached Mr. Charles in his study. My heart pounded as I knocked softly on the door. "Come in," he called, his voice steady. I stepped inside, my hands trembling slightly. He looked up from his desk, his expression wary. "Mia," he said, standing up. "Is something wrong?" I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage I had. "We need to talk," I said firmly. This situation can't continue. It's not right, and it's tearing me apart." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I know," he admitted. "I've been struggling with this too. I never meant to hurt you or James." "Then we need to find a way to fix it," I said, my voice trembling. "I think it's best if James and I move out. It's the only way to protect this family." His face fell, a mix of sadness and resignation crossing his features. "If that's what you think is best, I won't stand in your way," he said quietly. "But please know that I'm truly sorry for everything." Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded. "I know you are, but this is the only way forward." For the first time since the incident, I felt a glimmer of clarity. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. For James, for our marriage, and for the family as a whole, I had to take this step. A few days later, I finally gathered the courage to talk to James about moving out. We were sitting in the living room after dinner, the quiet hum of the television in the background. I turned to him, my heart pounding in my chest. "James, I think we need to move," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, surprised. "Move?
Why?"
"Everything is perfect here. We have a great setup, and Dad loves having us around." "What's wrong?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I just feel like it's time for us to have our own space. I think it'll be good for us, for our relationship. We can build something that's truly ours." James frowned, concern etched across his face. "Mia, is there something you're not telling me? You've seemed off lately, and now you want to leave? If something's wrong, please just tell me." Before I could respond, Mr. Charles entered the room, his footsteps hesitant. He had overheard our conversation, and his expression was a mix of regret and resolve. "James, Mia is right," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I think it's time you two had your own space. You've been here long enough, and it's important for you to grow as a couple." James looked between us, confused. "But Dad, why? You've always said you love having us here. What's changed?" Mr. Charles smiled faintly, resting a hand on James's shoulder. "Nothing has changed, son. I just think it's the right time. You and Mia deserve a home of your own, where you can focus on your future together. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." James seemed reluctant, his brow furrowed as he processed the idea. After a long pause, he sighed and nodded. "If that's what you think is best, Dad, then we'll start looking for a place. But I'll still visit often. You're still my dad." Mr. Charles smiled, though the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. "Of course, James. You'll always be welcome here." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and guilt. The decision to leave was the right one, but it didn't erase the weight of what had happened or the scars it left behind. In the weeks that followed, James and I found a small house not far from his father's. Moving out was bittersweet. As we packed our things, Mr. Charles helped quietly, his presence subdued but supportive. When the day came to leave, he hugged James tightly, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then he turned to me and said simply, "Take care, Mia." "I will," I replied, my voice barely audible. As we drove away, James chatted about decorating our new place, his excitement infectious. I smiled and nodded, trying to match his enthusiasm, but my heart felt heavy. Though we left the house behind, I knew I carried its memories with me. The guilt, the shame, and the lessons learned would remain. But I also knew that this was a chance to start fresh, a chance to rebuild the life James and I deserved. Moving forward, I promised myself to guard the boundaries of my relationships, to never let emotions cloud my judgment, and to cherish the family I had. Life was far from perfect, but it was a journey, and I resolved to navigate it with greater care and clarity. In the end, our decision to leave wasn't just an escape. It was an act of preservation for James, for me, and for the family we both loved. And as I looked at James, his smile bright and hopeful, I knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where healing and growth were finally possible.